Okay. Yeah, so welcome everyone. We're very happy to have Hyun-Ha here from the Spatial Dynamics Lab in Dublin, and she will be presenting on science collaboration, research funding, and novelty and publications. So for those of you who come regularly, you already know how it works. So Hyun-Ha will present. She'll make some breaks in between where you can ask questions, but if you want to ask any time in between, just either type into the chat box and I'll read the question out, or just raise your hand. I think as we're a small group, it's also fine to just interrupt if you have some burning question in between. Yeah, then, so I just started the recording. We will stop the recording after Hyun-Ha is done presenting. So then if we have time left in the end, you'll have the chance to ask questions off the record if you want to. Yeah, and then we'll post the presentation and the recording on the website later. As you might have seen, if you missed any presentation in the past, if you want to catch up on that, those are uploaded now, so you can watch those. But I think that's all, and I'll just hand it over to Hyun-Ha, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline, for having me at this seminar to present my work. And thanks everyone for coming to this seminar. So any questions and comments are welcome. Okay, so I'll start. Okay, the title of the presentation today is the Science Collaboration, Research Funding, and Novelty in Publications. This work is done with my colleagues, Dieter and Kyung-Wei. Okay, so I'll start with the research background. Well, scholars have emphasized the important role of scientific research in technological innovation and economic growth. So therefore, creating high research quality output is the foremost goal in scholarly activities. So for efforts to attempt high quality research, we focused on two components. The first is the collaborations in science, and second is the funding as investments in science. Well, first of all, for collaboration, the number of international collaborations have increased dramatically in the last 3 decades. And it is said that about 25% of Web of Science articles are coming from these international collaborative works. So, and scholars have studied whether these international collaborations have higher impact, and studies confirm that these co-authored papers are likely to have higher citation counts, which means they have higher impact. And recently, scholars are looking at the city level collaborations. However, these collaborations have been analyzed not much due to the data collecting and processing availability. And also these studies only focus on large or top publishing cities. And in terms of funding, numerous initiatives and policies of funding programs have been established by governments and many agencies, and they seek to enhance competitiveness and quality of research by supporting interdisciplinary collaborations and to pool researchers all together, and especially to help researchers from peripheral regions to make them participate in research collaborations and access to the frontier knowledge. Well, for the performance of funding, the assessment has been associated with the evaluation of efficiency and effectiveness of the research system, so mostly by R&D expenditure and the publication outputs. There are conflicting views to this discussion. Some say that there are positive relationship between this funding and publication outputs, and the others say that there is a negative or only a slight effect. And however, little is known about the role of funding, what direction the acquisition of funding has impact on individual works. Well, so far, you can realize that the collaboration and funding, the discussion of those two components have been associated with the citation impact of publications. Citation impact is one of the ways to measure the output of publications, because citation impact is a realization of peer recognition and impact on science community. So this impact measurement is very widely used in bibliometric research. However, it should be noted that citations are a measure of impact, not the research quality. So besides besides impact, there is concept novelty or creativity that should be considered valuable in scholarly outputs, because groundbreaking ideas or scientific breakthroughs are the ones to disrupt science and technology. And the novelty should be distinguished from the impact, because not always novel papers get high citations. And novelty, the concept of novelty is involved with new ideas and contributions that often come across disciplines and heterogeneous groups, because a new recombination of knowledge from different disciplines and different groups enables to extend the variety of knowledge pool and link distant sources of knowledge. So scholars have also attempted to measure the novelty of papers, and there are two main methods to measure the novelty. The first is using the reference data, and second is using the keywords data. So first, to measure the novelty, scholars have calculated the frequency of unexpected pairwise combinations of journals from references, or the ease of journal combinations that have never been made. So the study from Woozy and his colleagues was the first study to introduce this measurement of novelty, and they used the methods with the reference data, and this method has been used by several other scholars. However, there are some critics to this method, because most of the cited references are selected to contextualize the issues rather than to solve the practical problems. And it might under or overestimate the novelty depending on the use of combinations of journals in references. So sometimes it is hard to distinguish novelty and interdisciplinarity. So as an alternative, some studies suggested the methods using the keywords data. So it is to calculate novelty by the first appearance of keywords, and or the using new pairwise keywords combinations information of the publications. Okay, so when we go back to the concept of novelty, we can assume that novelty comes from interdisciplinarity, and we know that interdisciplinarity is the result from scientific collaborations. So it is reasonable to expect some correlations between this collaboration and novelty. However, only few attempts have been made to examine the relationship between the collaboration and novelty. So, well, one study used the number of countries per article and novelty, and found that the co-authorship indicates low novelty. And another similar study showed the inverted U-shaped relationship between the team size and novelty. So based on these concerns, we focused on novelty as scientific advancement with regard to collaboration and funding. So there are two objectives. First is to investigate the relationship between collaborations and novelty in publications. Here we calculate the country, region, and institutional level of collaborations, and we measured novelty with the keywords information of the publications. And the second one is to evaluate the role of funding. And here we use funding as a moderating variable, which is by including including funding as a moderating effect in the relationship between collaboration and novelty. So for the analysis, we retrieved publication data from Web of Science database, which is the most representative and widely used database for bibliometric analysis. And it covers wide range of information of publications, such as authors' affiliations and subjects, funding information, and so on. And we limit our data to journal articles and proceedings paper in the research field of life science, biomedicine, physical sciences, and technology. Also, we limit our data to the papers from European countries between 2008 and 2017. For the time periods, if you look at the figure right at the right side, we found out that the papers from before 2008 didn't have their funding information. So we think that it is because of some regulation or policy that made scholars to address their funding information on the publications. And so we decided to extract data from 2008 for the balance of the data of the variable. And for the novelty, we calculated novelty by capturing the first appearance of keywords. So first, we divided the keywords into novel and non-novel keywords. So novel keywords are the new keywords that have never appeared in the past 5 years. And non-novel keywords are the keywords that have already been appeared. So based on this division, we count the number of novel and non-novel keywords for each publication. And then we calculate the novelty as a proportion of new keywords to keywords in total. And then we take a natural logarithm transformation of novelty measure as a dependent variable to alleviate high skewness and normalize the distribution of the variable. And then for the independent variable, we use the collaboration variable, which is the count of different countries, NUTS 1, 2, 3 regions, and institutions per articles. And then we include a funding dummy variable as a moderating variable. So it is, if a paper was assigned at least 1 grant, then the dummy indicates 1, and otherwise it's 0. For the controls, we include the number of authors, subjects, references, and we also include a country border, which is if regional institutional collaborations is within the same country, then it's 1, and otherwise it's 0. So with these variables, and since the dependent variable is a continuous measure, we adopt ordinary least squares model with robust standard errors. And for the moderating effect, we include the interaction term of collaboration and the funding dummy. The moderating effects are confirmed through the significance of this interaction term. And we also made the collaboration variables. They are mean-centered to reduce the correlation problem with this interaction term. So our estimation model is like this. So from now on, I'll talk about the results of our analysis. But first, I'll talk about the descriptive analysis.
Sorry, should we just check before you get into the results if there are any question on the data, on the methods from anybody? Just taking a quick break before we get into the results. No? Okay, perfect. Then let's crack on.
Okay.
I might have, sorry, I might have a question, if I might.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just wondering, just a clarification actually. So how do you measure the collaboration through the co-authors affiliations? What type of granularity in this information you have?
Yeah, we calculate the collaboration from the affiliation data. So in the affiliation, there's like address. So we geocoded the NUTS regions and countries and institutions. So based on those information, we calculated the counts of collaborations.
Okay, okay. No, I was just wondering because so what happens in case somebody has a double affiliation? You take into account both of them. You discard those cases.
I think we are using the first affiliation.
Okay.
If there are double affiliation.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, is there any other questions?
Hello. Sorry, I have one question.
Yeah.
So, should we be worried about a potential endogeneity issue here of the funding being targeted to collaborations that are going to be more novel?
Well, yeah, funding, yes, studies have found that funding has effect on the collaboration. But here we are looking at the collaboration and novelty, and we are putting the funding as a moderating effect. And from the results, we checked that there is no multicollinearity problem or other problems. So I think that's not a big problem here.
I'm just worried.
Actually,
that
I haven't. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just worried that the funding may be targeted through some selection process, and this selection may consider future novelty.
What do you mean by selection?
Yeah. So what is funding? What is the funding? I mean.
Yeah, the Web of Science database provides us whether the publication has grant. So if there are at least one grant, then we say that the publication is funded, or otherwise it's not funded.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering the same thing. I think something that might be possible from your data is if you have sort of targeted funding for a specific project, or if you have like funding, like somebody has a, I don't know, like a PhD or fellowship or something, because you see in papers as well, right? I don't know about these sort of natural science papers, but maybe you can distinguish between targeted project funding and general like fellowship funding.
Yeah, actually in this study, we didn't divide those funding whether it is like targeted or not. We just used the information whether it is funded or not. So yeah, maybe that will be considered for the next studies.
Yeah. Dieter, did you want to say something?
Well, yeah, I suppose, most funding, even if let's say PhD students acknowledge funding, they would have received a scholarship through a targeted funded kind of project. I think the ones that get general fee waivers and so on, we are much less likely to acknowledge the funding, right? So in some sense, every funding is targeted, right? I mean, a funding agency doesn't give you just money to do whatever you want. They have a policy, they have a purpose, they have an objective. So in some sense, every funding is targeted. And I suppose what the only thing we can do right now is only to say it's funded or not funded. And I suppose that has big implications, because if it's funded, you have an agenda, you have to deliver on a program you proposed in your proposal and so on. If you're not funded, it might be, you know, more free flowing and, you know, experimental and so on. So I guess this also goes back to Fernando's question, but unfortunately the data wouldn't allow us to do any more at this point. You would then literally have to find the funding text, go back to the policy program or funding, and clearly that's very tedious.
Yeah, thanks, Cedar. So yeah, shall we continue now? Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll start from the results. So first is the descriptive analysis, and we illustrated the variables on geographical maps to check the reliability of our data and variables. So first of all, this figure indicates the number of scientific collaborations, and it is evidence that collaborative activities are concentrated in Western Europe countries, which have been shown by many other studies, and Western and Northeastern regions rank in top co-publishers. So these are the tables of top countries and regions in co-publication activities and top institutions in co-publication. And next is the figure of number of funded publications. And there is a similar pattern to collaboration. And it is obvious because number of funded publications and number of collaborations will be higher where their number of publications is higher. However, for the novelty, this is the map of average novelty of publications, and it is observed that there are some spots of high publication novelty in Eastern Europe. So this is a quite different pattern with the collaboration and funding. So from these geographical plotting, we can assume that large number of publications nor the collaborations does not stand for high novelty. And we have thought about possible explanation to this phenomenon. Well, we have measured the novelty as a first appearance of new keywords. Well, institutions in peripheral regions, we think that institutions in peripheral regions are likely to come up with some novel keywords, while big and popular institutions will stick to their specific research area and keywords. And a study have found that large teams focus on popular and high impact works, and small teams build on less popular things. So we think that core regions are likely to participate in big research teams, which focus on popular and high impact works, and peripheral regions in small collaborative teams, they are the ones who work on the novel ideas. And also, novel ideas can either result in influential outcomes or just fade away. And only the successful ideas among them later become the source of big teams' high impact research. In other words, when the novel ideas are created from some small research teams or in peripheral regions, some of the successful ideas can be developed by the large research teams in core regions that will be developed to some high impact research. And the next is the scatter plots of collaboration and novelty for the 5 collaboration levels. And we can see that there's a negative relationship from these scatter plots. And lastly is the summary statistics, and we can see that the mean values of collaborations are from 1.4 to 1.7 on average, and about 70% of publications are funded in our data. And also we can see the negative correlation between the collaboration and novelty from this correlation matrix. So I'll move on to the regression results. We included each level of collaboration one at a time at the regression. And regarding the collaboration and novelty, we confirm that negative effect of collaborations on novelty. And also, if you look at the country dummy variable, you can see that intercity and interinstitutional collaborations have higher, within the same country, have higher novelty than the ones across several countries. So from this result, we can assume that novelty decays among distance in these collaborations. And in terms of the moderating effect of funding, we have to look at this interaction term, and we can find that funding has a significant and positive moderating effect, which means that it alleviates the negative effect of collaboration and on novelty. And it is captured in these figures. These figures are the margins plot of collaboration and novelty in every collaboration levels. And the blue lines stand for unfunded works, and the red lines stand for funded works. So you can see that while collaborations have negative effect on novelty, funded works are more novel than the unfunded works among the collaborative works. And lastly, we conducted robustness tests by separating the disciplines. So remember that we have 3 different disciplines. So we conducted regressions for each discipline. The right table shows the results of NUTS2 level collaboration and novelty for each discipline. And some of the results show weaker significance, but overall results are generally consistent, and which is there is negative effect of collaborations and positive moderating effect of funding. Also, it is consistent throughout the other levels of collaboration. So in summary, we confirm that there is a negative and significant relationship between co-authorship and novelty, which is collaborative works indicate lower novelty than solitary works. And then second, funding has a significant moderating effect on the relationship between the 2 measures. So funded work papers are likely to have higher novelty than unfunded works among the co-authored research. And we have thought about the reason of negative effect of collaboration and on novelty. Well, the first, regarding the team size and collaborative learning process. Well, collaborative learning process is the agreement among several researchers and organizations through exchanging and modifying and elaborating the ideas. So this process is positive to citation impact, which means collaboration increases productivity by improving the knowledge diffusion with these collaborations. However, in terms of novelty, some disruptive ideas or outliers can be filtered out through this collaboration process when the size gets bigger. Indeed, a study shows that smaller teams are likely to create disruptive outcomes, and larger teams are likely to conduct developmental research. So smaller teams tend to explore and raise promising ideas from less popular findings, while larger groups, they would like to develop some successful ideas and stick to those common research designs. And if we think about the property of tacit knowledge, collaborative works mostly rely on distant communications because they come from teams, come from different geographical areas. So they have to use communication technologies to share the knowledge. However, tacit knowledge and inherited knowledge, which are very critical components, they are not likely to be transmitted through those channels. As you know, tacit knowledge is transferred through proximate distance and is even more immobile for high complex knowledge. So we can assume that distance decreases the opportunity for novel outcomes, which means novelty decays along distance. So, and this is also shown from our results that collaborations of regions and institutions within a single country had a higher novelty than the collaborations across more than one country. And moving on to the moderating effect of funding, we find a positive function of funding as an instrument to motivate explorative research. We found that funding allows collaborative researchers to overcome the difficulties for restrictions that comes along with the collaborations, as we see just earlier, and pursue novel outcomes. So we think that this highlights the importance of funding in science activities, that it not only contributes to the scientific advances, but also it gives the opportunity of novel outcomes. So in conclusion, this study contributes by examining macro, meso, and micro level of collaborations and linking them to the value of novelty of publications. And also it reveals the moderating effect of funding on novelty, which has been mostly unanswered. And the future works can be, we can expand scopes, for example, to non-scientific research fields, or we can expand geographic scope, and we can elaborate the measurement of novelty to capture novelty more systematically. And lastly, since we have we expect that there is a distance decay of novelty, we can empirically investigate this distance decay by including some distant variables. So this is all for my presentation, and thank you for listening.
Great, thank you. Let me switch off the recording and then we can have the final Q&A.